coming. This is just
hit continue. There's
just such a delight to have you all here and to share this little Purim adventure about the book of Esther with you. So let's get started. I'm going to share screen, see if that works, and get to my PowerPoint and let it fill the screen with joy. Here we go. All right, I am about to take you on a very exciting adventure through the book of Esther in a way that you probably have never seen it. And if you would all stop coming in and making those little bells, I would be able to talk. Now, I'm really glad to have anybody who wants to come. Okay, now let's see. Of course, it isn't working. There it is. Okay, a familiar passage, and an order was written to all that Mordecai had commanded to the Jews and to the satraps and the governors and the princes of the provinces from India as far as Ethiopia, 127 provinces, to every province according to its writing, and to every people according to their language. A familiar passage from the book of Esther. So it all began in Bali, this very bizarre project that I'm going to be sharing with you today. Now, Bali is a tiny Hindu island in the most populous Muslim country in the world, Indonesia. And I was there in 1990 to see if I could find talented hand wood carvers to reproduce the delicate carvings Noah Greenberg and I had created for our Stender project. The Balinese people have maintained their traditional culture with its palaces, royalty, princes and princesses, ceremonies and rituals. All of which reminded me of the extravagant royal scenes in the Esther story that we're about to read in a few days. The other thing I noticed when I was in Bali was their remarkable, wonderful, detailed little miniature paintings. In fact, I stayed in the monkey forest near Ubud during my visit there. So these two things, royalty and the miniatures, gave me an idea. So when I came back to Bali, I brought with me two small, 2-foot-long pieces of parchment with 6 little rectangles marked out lightly in pencil. Here you see an example. I also brought with me a copy of the Megillat Esther, the story of Esther, in Indonesian. And I circled 6 of the verses. These are the verses that I circled. The king's extravagant feast at the beginning of the story. The beauty contest to select a new queen. The king reaching out his golden scepter to Esther. 4, the villain Haman or Haman leading Mordecai on the horse. Number 5, the hanging of Haman's 10 sons. And 6, the writing of the Esther scroll to go out to all the lands, as we read at the beginning. So what I did when I got back to Bali was I gave these 2 parchments to 2 different artists in 2 different villages. And I gave them these simple instructions, which turned out to be the key to this whole project. What I said was, please read this story and imagine it is happening right here in your village. How would it look? Please paint an image in each rectangle depicting a verse in your own style. I didn't want them to imagine the story happening in Persia or elsewhere, as we're used to seeing the illustrations, but very locally in their own vernacular style and set in their own setting. Now, these 6 verses are exactly the same for both artists and have continued to be throughout the whole project. And these are the finished works that greeted me when I picked them up. Here you see they filled in the parchment. Here you get a sense of the scale. And this was from a little village called Kiliki, a tiny little village. And they have this artistic tradition to work very monochromatically. So here the artist is interpreting you see the king on the left, the party, the drinking going on. The beauty contest he showed with the women with their mirrors. The stretching out of the scepter to Esther by the king. Notice the detail. These are tiny to start with. You can imagine how small these little plants and objects are. The scene of the horse. So that was the first one I got, and I loved the detail, I loved the interpretation, and then went to Ubud to pick up the second example. Very different style, even though these villages are very close to each other, they have different artistic traditions. This is from Ubud. The party at the beginning, much more colorful. The beauty contest. And by the way, none of this is imaginary. This is exactly how Bali looks. The flora, the plants, the costumes, the architecture, all very, very true. Notice the scepter, how they showed it. The horse. Fairly gruesome hanging here. And the writing and reading of the scroll to go out to all the lands. Now, when I look closely at that scroll or that book, it looked a little unusual to me until I realized that they write their books on palm branches and bind them between covers with cord. So that's what you're actually seeing in the picture. Now, I was so taken by these remarkable works that I decided there might be even more potential in this little idea of mine. Perhaps even if this wasn't a project for 127 different lands, at least I might continue to suggest it to other folk artists around the world that I might someday happen upon. And so I continue. On to India. A student of mine was headed off to India, and I explained my idea to her in case she came upon some interesting artists in her travels. Again, the same local instructions. Visualize it as if it's happening in your culture, in your village, and the exact same verses. She returned with 2 tiny treasures. This artist did it in the Mughal style of the 16th to 18th century in India. There's an example of the art, and there's the artist's interpretation first of the party, the beauty contest. You see the women lined up here ready to go into the court of the king. The golden scepter, not sure, maybe somebody can tell me what this is in their culture, but it's obviously some symbol of royalty or power. Remember, these are about 6 inches high. And the writing of the scroll to go out to all lands. This next scroll is done in the Warli style. In this region, in the mountains of this region of India. This style is used on their architecture, on their buildings. Monochromatic, just white on red usually, or a deep red. Here you see it, how it would appear on their homes. Very simple, graphic, abstract images, but I love the wonderful playfulness and the design of them. They later came to do it on paper and did prints of them like this. And this is how the artist depicted this story of Esther. This is the party at the beginning, the beauty contest, the women at the bottom, the king at his table, the scepter. Just love the imagination and the playfulness of these. Haman with horns and 2 eyes, one on top of each other. Here he is again being hung with his sons as kind of puppets. And they're sending out the word, announcing it to all nations and sending it out by sea and land as they go. Yalanji. We're now in Australia. A friend of mine announced that she was headed off for Australia. I think she might be on the call, in fact. And her trip would include visits to the Aboriginal people here. She kindly offered to take the parchment and see what she might find. And find she did. Very, very top of Australia, on the eastern side. And the artist was named Emma Burchill. Fortunately, she wrote me a detailed description of how she interpreted each of the 6 images. And I'll give you an example of the first one. These are these famous dot paintings that they started to do in the 1970s and has become a real fad in international art. I'm sure many of you have seen these dot paintings. They're always looked at from above. We're looking at a bird's eye view down at a campfire, which Emma will explain. She said, the picture represents the coming together for the feast. In the Yalanji culture, this is depicted by the circle in the middle. In our culture, the feast would be celebrated around a fire, and dancing the korobori would take place. The colors in the painting speak of the significance of the people attending the ceremony. The gold represents royalty, the red is the earth, the nobles, and the yellow of the princesses. The white represents the servants. Emma Burchell. This is the korobori she talks about as they're dancing around the fire for their feast. That's the way they would do their feast. And similarly, she gave me a description how she translated each of the parts into their Yalanji culture. These are acrylic paintings. Casale Monferrato. My wife Rosalind and I had a remarkable trip to the Piemonte region in Italy, where we visited the many magnificent Baroque synagogues hidden behind the plain facades in the Jewish quarters. These were often on the third floor of an apartment building, hidden away, small, tiny, intimate little synagogues, but beautifully decorated. We know the tradition from the Italian synagogue, the Israel Museum, and other ones that have come to Israel. But we went around this region and saw them, the originals. This is the one, this is the synagogue that we went to. This is probably one of the biggest of them. And upstairs in the balcony, they had a small exhibit of local artists. And I was struck by one of the local artists' work, whom we, after some difficulty, were able to track down. Paolo Novelli, very whimsical style that he painted in, and I thought it could be very appropriate. He spoke no English, and our Italian wasn't that great, so the communication was difficult. But when I proposed it to him and showed him the size we were working with, all these others were in this miniature size. He said, "I'd love to do your project, but I can't work that small." So I said, you know, okay, fine, work at whatever scale you please. And this began our opening up of the project to alternative, less rigid formats, like this accordion book he created. Here you see him working on the work itself, and then adding the color. The feast at the beginning. The beauty contest. The golden scepter. And the writing of the scroll to go out to all the lands. On his own, since it was an accordion book, on his own, he decided to show the various characters from the book on the back of each page. So here's Esther and Mordecai and the king Achashverosh, the horse of the king. And this one I puzzled over a bit and couldn't figure out what those scissors were doing on the turban until I read the inscription here that says, "This is the eunuch of the king." My Ukrainian friend Boris Gozo lives here in Jerusalem, an exceptionally talented artist. He may be on this call. I invited him to be on, and I think he may be here. And he accepted my challenge to give the project a try, located in rural Ukrainian countryside. We can only imagine what horrors are happening there right now. This is back to the miniature size again. The horse, peasants, the sun's hanging in a tree as they're drinking their vodka or whatever they're drinking. And the writing of the scroll. This artist wandered into my studio one day with his wife or friend. Very hard to communicate. He spoke neither English nor Hebrew, and I knew no Russian. But he had a cell phone with him and used Google Translate to communicate between us. And I somehow managed to explain to him the project with the help of one of the artists on my lane who speaks Russian, and he took on the project. Party, beauty contest, golden scepter. We're moving now to the Americas, to Peru. Retablos are little miniature village scenes created in small boxes. Here's Peru. These are about 2 inches deep, 1.5 inches deep. Sometimes they have doors, as you see on the sides, that close. They could be village scenes like these, or nativity scenes. And I met Zuli Jimenez, and she works with her mother in Peru. Here they are. And although I gave her the standard instructions that she should imagine the story as taking place right in their little village, and she her family has been doing this kind of retablo work for many generations, but Zuli had her own idea of what to do. And her notion was to, rather than do it in a contemporary style, to imagine how her ancient Inca ancestors would have played out this story. And she carefully researched the arts and crafts of the ancient Inca people, the ceramics, the pots, the dresses, the patterns, and did it in the Inca style. At the end, she writes me, "Good night, Mr. David Moss. The project is delivered, about Queen Esther, the defender of the Jewish people. The work is done with potato flowers and the textile designs of the Inca Empire with typical dishes of the area. We were very proud to do it in art. Blessings and hugs, Zuli Jimenez." And here's their interpretation. Party. The beauty contest. They're always done in these two panels, two up and an upper and a lower panel. The golden scepter. She writes, the project of the altarpiece of Queen Esther was only made for you in the Inca style that has animals from the area, like the flame. Before, in the pre-Inca era, there were no horses. There were only llamas. Mordecai on a llama, gotta be a first. How adorable is that? The hanging at the bottom. And the final scene. Zuli writes, it was an unforgettable experience to carry out the project because it is not only a work of art, but that there is culture inside, and that represents a lot of history. Moving now to Ecuador. More llamas, more llamas. And speaking of llamas, these small paintings are done on llama skins stretched onto frames. Here you see Edwin at work, the detail, and his 6 paintings. Horse, the hanging of Haman, and the scene at the end. The molas of the Kuna people of Panama and Colombia. They live on the islands and on the mainland of Panama and reaching over into Colombia. These are embroideries, detailed embroideries. The way they make them is each color is a full layer of cloth, and they cut through 1, then 2, then 3, then 4 layers to reveal the colors beneath, and then stitch them all very carefully at the sides. And this is the way they would wear them. Here's some examples. I've always loved these, the way they divide their space and decorate and the geometric elements. This is one that we happen to own. And when it's from the 1950s. And when I saw it, I was totally convinced that Keith Haring must have seen these and taken his style from these molas from Panama and Colombia. I asked Miriam Rodriguez Gallego to give a try at molas about the Esther story. Here's her set. See, these are larger. Party at the beginning. Beauty contest. I love how she did this with the views of the different women from the back, from the side, from the front, inside. Not sure who. Golden scepter. and Esther writing the scroll, Pazi Veradad, Shalom Ve'emet. Nepal, again, how I will send the story in the language of the artists with the 6 verses indicated. Here's his interpretation. Wayang Beber, the ancient art of Javanese scroll theater and shadow puppets. Again, we're back in Indonesia, in the large island of Java. Here's Bali, where we saw before. And here's how they would use these scrolls to tell stories, accompanied by the gamelan orchestra and chanting the stories as they illustrate them by unrolling the scrolls. Javanese Hagba. These are very exaggerated characters they'd use. And a similar tradition with the shadow puppets, the famous Javanese shadow puppets. Together with the gamelan orchestra. These can go on for like 3 hours, these stories in front of an audience as the puppeteers act out and recite the stories. Bilal Erlanga, he asked me to call him only corresponded by writing. I think he may be on the Zoom as well tonight. If he is, hi. There he is working on his interpretation. The party. Beauty contest. Golden scepter. Horses. Writing of the Megillah. Esther wrote me, these were just completed very recently, by the way. I was very enthusiastic and fell in love from the first time David explained the concept and background of this Esther project. The story, royal hegemony, conflicts of interest, and the plot in Esther's story has characteristics similar to royal stories that we call keraton in my culture, Javanese culture. From this project, I learned a new concept, tried to translate it from the point of view of Javanese culture, then visualized it in the Wayang Beber style. This experience was very memorable and meaningful for me. Bilal Erlanga. Moving now to another remote area of the world. This is a remote region bordering on the East Pacific Ocean, and the descendants of the 19th century conquerors have developed a rather unique ethnic culture. This is where it is. And this is their rather unique ethnic culture. Including some very strange imagery. About 6 years ago, we were visiting our daughter Jackie and her family in Chicago. We went to the Intuit Museum of Outsider Art, and Jackie comes out of the gift shop smiling. Abba, I think I found something you're going to really like. Some unique and wildly imaginative envelope art by an artist called Philip Carey. Now, Philip packs full illustrations of his complex dreams, each session of his dialysis treatments or incidents from his travels onto regular envelopes with fine details. And then he produces them as signed limited edition envelopes stamped and ready to mail. I bought quite a few as well as one of his books and was totally charmed by their wit, humor, creativity, and delightful, whimsical, detailed art. I also reached out to Philip to contact him and congratulate him. And this began a wonderful friendship. We traded works of art, and whenever we were in California, Roz and I would visit him at his home or meet him somewhere else. Tragically, last month, his son kindly informed us that he had passed away. We'll sure miss his exuberant zest for life, his generous spirit, and his overflowing imagination. This talk today and the exhibit is dedicated to his memory. At some point, I mentioned my Esther project to him and asked him if he'd like to give it a try. With the prominence in the story of the remarkable Persian postal system, I thought some envelope art might fit in perfectly. He was curious, but didn't jump at the opportunity, and I didn't push him. This is the little village, fishing village of Morro Bay where he lived. After his death, I reached out to his partner, Linda. She lives in Oregon and we never met, but Philip always raved about her on every single visit. She filled me in a bit on the background of his decision to take on our project. Quote, we were traveling by small boat around the Hawaiian Islands when he decided to get serious about the Esther project. In our little cabin, we read your notes and the book of Esther many times. I marvel that those words transformed into the envelopes that tell the story from the Morro Bay point of view. How did he do that? I also love the fact that one of the envelopes had a detour somewhere in the world, but eventually arrived in Israel. Signed, Linda. The originals of each of these 6 envelopes were sent over a period of many months by regular mail to Israel through the US Postal Service. You see the little hill that was in the middle of the bay here in his Morro Bay, his return address and my address that it was to be mailed to. What he did was he picked animals for each of the characters. So Ahasuerus, the king, is a monarch butterfly, and Mordecai is a bald eagle, and Esther a bobcat, Haman a coyote, and so forth. Here's the beauty contest with the king butterfly. He wrote out the verses again. The stamp, these were actually sent through the mails. This is the one that got somehow lost. He seemed to have forgotten to put a stamp on it. And so returned to sender. He got it back a year later or something and decided this time to actually put it in the envelope rather than sending the work of art itself. The coyote Haman is leading Mordecai, of course, on a seahorse. Here he lists the names of each of the 10 sons and what creature each one is. These are done in ink and colored pencils. And the sending of the scroll out to the far ends of the earth. Here you see Esther taking copies of the scroll and giving them to the seahorses. He says marine mail via seahorses, terrestrial mail via roadrunners, running out and taking the message to the 127 nations. The Mimbres people are an extinct civilization from southern New Mexico, flourished for about 150 years. No one knows who they were. They had no writing. All that's left of them are some remnants of their buildings and these incredible black and white pottery that they created. I've always loved these. These are their pots. So it occurred to me that somehow it wasn't fair that only living artists from present folk cultures could participate in my project. I always have loved the remarkable pottery remains of the ancient Mimbres people. So I decided I'd imagine myself as an extinct Mimbres Indian and try my hand at the 6 verses myself. The party at the beginning, the beauty contest, the golden scepter, Haman leading Mordecai on the horse, the hanging of the sons, and the oral spreading of the message of Esther in a culture without writing. Some more are on their way. And if you come across an amazing, talented, imaginative folk artist anywhere in the world, send her my way. Maybe someday we'll get to 127. The first thing that almost everyone asks when they viewed this collection informally is, what are your plans for this? When will you publish the book? Will there be a traveling exhibit? Why are you even doing this? I typically reply by saying that I'm doing this project for much less practical reasons. Here are 10 of them. 1, that I love the adventures it draws me into and the incredible people we've met through it. 2, that I too consider myself an untrained folk artist and feel a deep inner kinship with these artists from around the world. 3, that it's somehow comforting to realize that there are artists out there even more compulsive and obsessive than I am. 4, that sometimes, as in the book of Esther, miracles, large and small, can be hidden and appear in the least likely of places. 5, that this decades-long project beautifully demonstrates the potential power of a very simple idea. 6, that it's a nice change to have an ongoing project with no deadlines, no pressure, and no completion, and that is done just for the joy of the doing. 7, that this is a wonderful reminder to myself of how a meta work of art like this, or like the architectural projects I do, can be created through collaboration without me actually doing every brush stroke by myself. 8, that I've been blessed with the unimaginable gift of a successful artistic career of over 50 years of expressing my own people's culture, texts, values, and ideas artistically. Thanks to many of the people on this Zoom and so many others. And I delight in sharing some of that blessing with other artists, perhaps not quite as fortunate. 9, that I'm continually surprised, delighted, and thrilled when those packages arrive. Much like the experience I seek to provide to my Millionaire subscribers who regularly get editioned art surprises from me. That, by the way, was a bit of a commercial plug. Sorry, but contact me if you'd like to know more. 10, that remarkably, the messages and values espoused and cherished by our minuscule ancient people, less than 0.2% of the world's population, are still worth sharing with at least 127 provinces, from India to Ethiopia. However, despite all these rather impractical reasons for doing this project, a couple years ago, my dear wife, Rosalind, suggested doing an exhibit of these at Kol Ha'ot, the organization where we use Jewish art to illuminate, inspire, educate, and create. We have a magnificent gallery right across from my studio in the Artist's Lane here in Jerusalem. My daughter, Elisa, the director of Kol Ha'ot, loved the idea and was ready to jump on it just before Purim of 2020, when the COVID plague hit the 127 provinces of the world. This year, as things are beginning to open up, Elisa scrambled to assemble a beautiful exhibit to which you are all invited to view these extraordinary artists' work in all their tiny glory. Tragically, due to a horrible illness, Rosalind will not be able to appreciate this exhibit, but we're dedicating it and this talk to honor her and to express deep gratitude for the unbelievable outpouring of love, comfort, and care that is poured forth to our dear family from all over the world. As a lover of the visual arts, Rosalind understood deeply its ability to inspire and transform. As a lover of the art of living, she lived every moment with sincerity, joy, and enthusiasm. As a docent in the Israel Museum for nearly 40 years, she has guided scores of exhibits and hundreds of people. And as the trusted guide of our whole family, Rosalind has led us through life with generosity, wisdom, and incredible devotion. I just got this picture of Rosalind and me on Friday. It was taken by Philip Carey on one of our visits to Morro Bay and just sent to us by his dear partner, Linda, who included the exuberant address label to us that Philip had made just before he was taken to the hospital and never got to send. So I guess this project is really just about connections, about treasured relationships, about what our children tease us about, especially Rosalind. Some strange ability to, quote, hit it off, unquote, with, well, just about anyone. The exhibit will be open starting now. You can check the hours at Kola Oat. Here's how it's presented. You're all welcome to the Artist Lane in Jerusalem. Little plug at the end for my publisher, Beta Alpha Editions, where it's almost Pesach, and that means Haggadot, everybody. Thanks so much for coming. Elisa, thanks for organizing. And maybe we have a few minutes for questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Abba. Thank you all for coming. Abba, you haven't seen, but as you've been talking, the chat has been very active with lots of oohs and ahs and excitement and touching appreciation. We have just a few minutes for some questions and answers. I think the best way to do it would be through the chat. We already have at least one question from Bernard, wanted to know how you chose these specific 6 verses or sections. And I believe Ivan also had a question, so if it's still relevant, please send it to us. Abba, go ahead.
The choice of the verses was fairly random. You know, when I started this, I wasn't imagining it would turn into what it is, but I wanted some spread throughout the book and something that would be verses that would be very vivid and appropriate for illustration. What was the other question, Elisa?
I didn't hear it yet. By the way, Philip's son is on and sent the website, the link to his website. Sandy is asking, can you buy a book of the art, and what about a virtual tour online? So this was the virtual tour. A few people have asked whether there will be access to the recording of this session. And the answer is, if you would like to receive the recording, please send an email to our Kolaod office and we'll send it out to you. And I just put the email in the chat. Any other questions? There are a lot of words of appreciation here. If anyone else has a question, please feel free to put it in the chat or raise your hand, but I can't see you all on one screen. I have like 5 screens here, or 3. So if there are any other questions, Ivan, did you have a question? Anyone else?
Sherry has a question. Sherry,
go ahead.
Hi. How many places did you actually visit, and how were you able to get, I mean, I know how you got to Australia, but how were you able to get to other places, and how many of the places did you actually visit?
not all these places have I been to. Some would be artists that I would meet at international art fairs. Some would be where we were actually there. It's just totally random, you know. I just keep my eyes. Some I found over the internet. It's been pretty random, and there's no schedule. It just, whenever it happens, it happens. And Sherry was indeed the messenger for the Aboriginal art from Australia. Thank you, Sherry.
One more plug I'll just say is that before we did this session, we did one for our current participants and alumni of our Teacher Institute for the Arts. These are teachers in Jewish day schools in North America who are participate in a program that we run. And in that case, we not only had the presentation that you just saw, but we had them learning the verses, interacting with them, and we asked them each to bring an object that would represent in their own culture each one of these verses. So while we don't have time for you to do this, I'm going to leave you with that thought. Think if you would like, what would represent for you the choosing of the queen in in your culture? What would represent the hanging of the sons? What would represent riding Mordecai being led on the horse, etc. We have one more question, which was, has any artist refused to participate, Abba?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, and there have been artists that have agreed to do it and have never done it. And there have been works that have been done and never arrived. And there have been all kinds of incidents along the way. So it's been a fascinating journey, and that's all part of the excitement of the enterprise. It has enriched our lives in interesting ways.
And Iris asks, do the people who you're working with have an understanding of the story and an inkling about Judaism?
The Christian ones certainly do. The non-Christian ones, I think, probably do not.
And
They're
two final
taking the
questions.
story just as it is, in their language and building it from there for the most part.
The two final questions. One, were the artists compensated for their work?
Yes, whatever they ask.
And two, and I think this would be a beautiful place to end. Emily asks if Ima had a favorite in the collection.
Gosh, I don't know. I don't think so. Part of it is the variety, when you'll see in the exhibit that the power comes from the diversity, I think, a lot of what it has. Also, I'm seeing some of the artists and some of the relatives of the artists are on, and I want to thank you all so much. I want to thank Elisa. I'm really overwhelmed that we got up to about 150 screens on here. I don't know how many people that represents, but I'm grateful and humbled, and thank you all so much for joining me. And I'll stay on a little longer if anyone wants to chat a few minutes or ask more. I know
Thank you all.
the hour is up, so I'll let you go.
Thank you.